Not a farmer. Okay, I routinely watch the things that I plant die. I can't keep grass alive. But if you're a farmer or somebody with a green thumb, you know the labor of love that goes into a favored plant. Sometimes people, I hear women tell stories about weep when a plant died. Okay, I've never been so attached. But this vine dresser must have had taken particular care of this tree because he actually fights for its survival. And in the Greek, there's even more emotion that you can identify by looking at the language. Please notice the first phrase of verse 9. First phrase of verse 9. Now my version, the NAS, and the NAS is the version the Apostle Paul used. But my version says this, if it bears fruit next year, fine. Okay? But you'll notice in the NAS, if you've got one, you'll notice that fine is on italics. And what's that mean when something's in italics? Right? It's not there. It's kind of a word that's been supplied, right? It's not in the original Greek. It's been put there in English so that we can kind of understand the meaning. Other versions put well or good or something along those lines. The truth of the matter is, listen, there's no word there. I remember when I translated this first time, I'm like, what am I missing here? So something's missing. Literally, the man says this: if it bears fruit next year, right? He doesn't say, yeah, kind of. It's like, how do you interpret that, right? It's just kind of an understood emotion. If we were watching these two men, even if Jesus was telling this parable, we were watching him, we would get it. But there's no object here, but it certainly implies something. One commentator I read says this man is maybe emotional. As he talks about this tree, and it's about to lose its life, he gets emotional, he gets choked up. That may be, but the point I think is this guy is passionate about this tree, and he hopes against all reasonable hope that this tree might just still make it. So he appeals for its life. He's even willing to burden himself that much more just to see that this tree is given another chance. So here's his plan. Okay, he's going to dig around the tree. He's going to loosen the soil, right, aerate it so you can get some more water in there, and he's going to put fertilizer in it, kapria, right, literally manure or dung. Okay, that's not a key word, but if you're a Greek student, you're trying to impress your sons with your knowledge of Greek, and knowing the Greek word for poop is a helpful thing. My kids like that, kapria. But this tree was already privileged, but now it's going to get even more care, right? Because this vine dresser, whose number one concern is the vines, right, not the tree, is going to spend even more time trying to help it out. And again, we see his passionate plea to his master, Kurios, Lord, sir, let it alone. Please don't kill the tree. Give it one more chance. Let me humble myself for the sake of this fruitless tree. And does that sound like our Lord or what? Right? This is what our Lord did for Israel. Christ himself came to them. He humbled himself before them. He became their servant. He interceded for them. He died so that sinners might be saved and bear fruit. And if you know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, this is what Christ did for you, right? How fruitless, how faithless have we been over and over again in life, right? And how faithful, how God has remained faithful to us. And if you don't know Christ, how presumptuous. Because though God is slow to wrath, judgment will come. Right? And that's the promise that Christ gave in Luke 13:5 and 3. All who fail to repent will perish, he said earlier on in this chapter. In fact, that's the fate of this tree if it fails to produce fruit. This tree is going to be given one more chance, but if that doesn't prove successful, then guess what? Now, let me give you a quick grammatical note here without getting too technical, and I'm no Greek scholar. But in Greek, there are first, second, and third class conditional clauses. If you have an if-then statement, that's what we got here. A couple of if-then statements, right? There are if-then statements that mean, if this happens, and it likely will, then this. Okay, and then there are some that are more negative than that. If this happens, and it's doubtful, then this. Okay, so look at verse 9 with that in mind. The first if-then statement in verse 9 points to something that is unlikely to happen. So the idea is this: if it bears fruit, and it's doubtful it will. Okay, if it bears fruit, and I know it's a long shot, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it makes it, please let it stay. But the next clause in verse 9, by contrast, is a first-class conditional clause, and it points to something that is likely to happen. So the idea is, if it does not bear fruit, which is highly likely, then cut it down, which is probably what's going to happen.
Yeah.
What Jesus is showing here is this is a last-ditch effort. God has been ridiculously generous with the nation of Israel, overly merciful. And then on top of his mercy, he's given more mercy. And he's even sent them his son. And he's even allowed his son to walk among them and endure criticism and mocking without bringing down the hammer. And even before it's over, he will allow his own son to be tortured and murdered among them. And then, even then, God, consider how much more mercy God shows the nation of Israel even after they put his son on the cross. Christ rises from the dead, and he sends the apostles where? To the house of Israel first. Right? The Holy Spirit is sent to Jerusalem, and the church begins among the Jews. Peter is sent to preach to the Jews that killed Christ. Paul goes to the synagogue first. The gospel goes to the Jew first, and then to the Greek. How incredibly patient and merciful is God. He could have wiped them out over and over again. He could have killed them, and yet more grace, more mercy, more compassion. But don't forget, though God is compassionate, he has promised to punish the wicked. As merciful as God is, he is also holy and just, and this tree, if it produces no fruit, will be cut down. Now, though this sermon directly relates to Israel, it is meant for everybody to hear. In fact, Jesus, I love the way he ends parables. Oftentimes they're open-ended. It's kind of leaving this question of, what will you do? And that's kind of the way this one ends. Look at verse 9 again. If it bears fruit next year, fine, but if not, cut it down. Next page. Wait a minute, what happens to the tree, right? We don't get the end of the story. Now, from the parable anyway, we don't know whether the tree gets cut down or not. And we know that Israel ultimately does reject the yoke. Right? They kill Christ. Jerusalem is destroyed. Even to this day, they're suffering. But Jesus ends this parable, I think, appealing to the listener. What about you? You're already on borrowed time. You should have already been judged. You've been shown mercy. What are you going to do? Are you going to continue to presume upon God, or are you going to submit to Christ and do deeds keeping with fruit? So think about that. If you don't know Christ, how close might you be to judgment? One breath away, ultimately. Right? Don't presume upon God. Great parable, isn't it?
Amen.
It's one of my favorites. Let's pray. Father, thank you.